If you're lying in bed right now, wondering whether history could ever be boring enough to lull you to sleep, but just spicy enough to keep your dreams interesting, then congratulations, you've stumbled into the powdered-wigged, candlelit, goat-haunted world of the Hellfire Club. This isn't your average tale of dusty treaties and royal tea parties. No, this is the story of a secret society so absurd, so scandalous, and so spectacularly unserious that it makes modern cults look like book clubs. Founded in 18th century England by a man who wore silk robes and quoted Latin while tipsy. The Hellfire Club was less evil conspiracy and more aristocratic sleepover with wine and questionable rituals. They met in caves. They dressed as monks. They toasted to nonsense. And somewhere in the mix, there may have been a goat named Jeremy, not confirmed, but spiritually accurate. So, fluff your pillow, dim the lights, and prepare to drift off into a tale of powdered mischief, candlelit chaos, and the kind of historical silliness that makes you wonder, were they geniuses, lunatics, or just really bored? Welcome to the Hellfire Club, where sin was stylish, secrets were silly, and history is finally boring enough to help you sleep. And if you enjoy drifting off to scandalous snoozery, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our very own society of sleepy sinners. In the foggy folds of 18th century England, one man looked at a monastery and thought, this could use more wine and fewer morals. That man was Sir Francis Dashwood, aristocrat, prankster, and founder of the Hellfire Club. Dashwood wasn't interested in politics or piety. He was interested in caves, specifically the chalky hills of West Wickham, where he carved out a network of tunnels perfect for candlelit nonsense. There, he gathered a group of elite mischief makers who wore monk robes, toasted imaginary gods, and held rituals that were equal parts satire and sleepover. Their motto, "Do what thou wilt," which loosely translated to, let's drink, chant, and confuse the goats. Members included poets, politicians, and possibly Benjamin Franklin, though historians still debate whether he was there or just photobombed a painting. The club wasn't evil. It was theatrical rebellion, a place where powdered wigs met pagan parody. And yes, there were goats. No one knows why. They might have been symbolic, or just really good at keeping secrets. So, as you drift off tonight, picture a candlelit cave, a stolen robe, and a group of very rich men pretending to summon ancient spirits, all because they were bored and had access to chalk. History, it turns out, is just one long, weird pajama party. Let us now turn our attention to the most suspicious object in 18th century England, the powdered wig. It wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a disguise. A fluffy, flower-dusted helmet of hypocrisy. And within the Hellfire Club, it was practically a passport to mischief. Picture this: a moonlit evening in West Wickham. The caves are glowing with candlelight. The wine is flowing, and in walks a gentleman whose wig is so large it could host a small bird family. He bows dramatically, quotes a fake Latin proverb, and proceeds to recite poetry about cheese. This was not unusual. In fact, the powdered wig was part of the ritual. Members of the Hellfire Club wore them not just to blend in with society, but to mock it. The bigger the wig, the bigger the joke. Some were so elaborate they had secret compartments for snuff, notes, or emergency biscuits. Sir Francis Dashwood himself was known to wear a wig so absurdly tall that it once knocked over a candelabra. He called it the monument to vanity. Others followed suit, turning their heads into miniature stages for satire. But beneath the wigs and robes, the club's real power was its ability to poke fun at everything sacred: religion, politics, fashion. Nothing was safe. They held mock masses, toasted to imaginary saints, and rewrote biblical verses to include punchlines about wine and trousers. It wasn't just rebellion. It was performance art, a candlelit comedy show in a cave. And yet, despite the silliness, the Hellfire Club had influence. Members included lords, lawmakers, and thinkers. They shaped policy by day and shaped punchlines by night. Their antics were whispered about in drawing rooms and condemned from pulpits, which only made them more popular. Because in a world obsessed with appearances, the Hellfire Club offered something rare: the freedom to be ridiculous. So next time you see a powdered wig in a museum, don't just think of dusty portraits. Think of candlelit caves, goat-themed poetry, and the quiet rebellion of laughter. The wig wasn't just a fashion choice. It was a fluffy middle finger to the establishment. By now, you've met the powdered pranksters and their candlelit cave. But you may still be wondering, why goats? Excellent question. No one knows. Some say the goats were symbolic, representing pagan fertility, mischief, or the general mood of, let's confuse the clergy. Others believe they were simply there to add ambience. After all, nothing says elite satire society like a goat chewing on a velvet curtain. The truth is, the Hellfire Club loved theatrical chaos, and goats, bless them, are natural-born scene stealers. They wandered the tunnels, occasionally interrupting mock rituals with well-timed bleats, and once, allegedly, drank someone's wine. That goat was never seen again, probably promoted. But goats weren't the only hazard. The club's fondness for firelight and flowing goblets made every gathering a potential insurance nightmare. Picture a room full of tipsy aristocrats in flammable robes, waving candles and quoting Voltaire. It's a miracle the caves didn't spontaneously combust. One member, Lord Sandwich, yes, the sandwich guy, was known for his dramatic entrances. He once arrived, dressed as the devil, complete with horns and a tail, and proceeded to deliver a sermon about roast beef. It was considered one of the more restrained evenings. The goblets, meanwhile, were never empty. Wine flowed like philosophy, and toasts were frequent. They toasted to liberty, to laughter, to imaginary saints like Saint Bacchus of the bottomless cup. Some toasts were serious, most were not. One popular ritual involved raising a glass to the sacred order of nonsense, followed by interpretive dancing and someone falling into a barrel. And yet, despite the chaos, the club had rules. Sort of. You had to be witty, wealthy, and willing to wear a toga in public. You had to respect the goats, and above all, you had to understand that the whole thing was a joke, a candlelit satire of power, piety, and powdered pomposity. So, as you drift off tonight, imagine the scene: a flickering cave, a goblet raised, a goat nibbling on a wig, and a group of gentlemen who, despite their titles, were just trying to make history a little sillier. Let us now enter the most sacred chamber of the Hellfire Caves, a place of ritual, reverence, and absolutely no theological accuracy. It was called the Inner Temple, and it looked like something out of a flare dream designed by a drunk architect with a flair for drama. Candles lined the walls. Skulls adorned the altar. And in the center stood a goblet so large it could double as a bird bath. This was where the mock mass took place, a satirical ceremony designed to poke fun at religious pomp, while celebrating the true Holy Trinity: wine, wit, and well-timed absurdity. The priest, usually Sir Francis Dashwood himself, dressed in robes that looked suspiciously like they'd been borrowed from a theater production of Julius Caesar. He would begin the service with a solemn chant in fake Latin, something like Domino est pizza, sanctum est, and proceed to bless the wine with exaggerated flair. The congregation, seated on velvet cushions and possibly tipsy, responded with theatrical groans. It was confiscated for being too sincere. The sermon was always improvised. Topics included the spiritual importance of naps, the divine mystery of cheese, and a parable about a man who lost his wig in a windstorm and found enlightenment. It was nonsense, of course, but it was glorious nonsense. After the sermon came the ritual toast, where each member raised their goblet and pledged allegiance to the sacred order of nonsense, a fictional sect devoted to satire, sleep, and snacks. The motto: in vino veritas, in cheese comfort, which loosely translates to truth in wine, comfort in dairy. Then came the procession. Members would march around the cave in a circle, chanting, laughing, and occasionally tripping over their robes. One evening, a goat joined the procession and was declared an honorary bishop. It was a proud moment. But beneath the silliness, there was something oddly profound. The Hellfire Club's mock mass wasn't just parody, it was protest. A candlelit rebellion against hypocrisy, pretension, and the idea that power must always be serious. They weren't mocking faith. They were mocking the misuse of it, and in doing so, they created a sanctuary for satire. A place where laughter was sacred and absurdity was divine. Let's now cross the Atlantic, not by ship, but by scandal. It's the mid-18th century, and Benjamin Franklin, inventor, diplomat, and part-time kite enthusiast, is in England. He's charming the aristocracy, debating philosophers, and possibly, just possibly, attending a candlelit gathering in a cave full of goats and goblets. The rumor that Franklin, ever the curious soul, was invited to a meeting of the Hellfire Club. The evidence, thin, the gossip, delicious. According to whispers and one suspiciously poetic diary entry, Franklin was intrigued by the club's blend of satire and scandal. He admired Dashwood's wit, enjoyed a good toast, and had a known fondness for eccentric company. So, when the invitation came, sealed with wax and probably smelling faintly of wine, he accepted. Now, picture it, Franklin descending into the chalky caves of West Wickham, candle in hand, wig slightly askew. He's greeted by Dashwood, who's dressed like a Roman senator and holding a goblet the size of a toddler. A goat bleats in approval. The evening begins with a toast to liberty, laughter, and lightning. Franklin chuckles. Someone quotes Voltaire. Someone else misquotes Shakespeare. A mock sermon is delivered in fake Latin, and Franklin, ever the diplomat, nods solemnly. Then comes the procession. Robes are donned, candles are raised, and somewhere in the chaos, Franklin's trousers vanish. Was it a prank? A ritual? A wardrobe malfunction? No one knows. But the next morning, Franklin allegedly emerged from the caves wearing a toga, holding a cheese wheel, and humming a hymn to Saint Bacchus. He never spoke of it again. Of course, historians debate the truth of this tale. Some say it's pure fiction. Others say it's plausible. Franklin was known for his wit, his curiosity, and his occasional disregard for pants. But whether fact or fantasy, the story endures, because it captures the spirit of the Hellfire Club, a place where even the most serious minds could surrender to silliness, satire, and sacred nonsense. All good things, even candlelit chaos, must come to an end. By the late 1760s, the Hellfire Club was beginning to flicker. The wine still flowed, the wigs remained absurd, and the goats continued to chew on ceremonial robes. But something had changed. Sir Francis Dashwood, the club's founder and chief mischief maker, was growing older. His pranks were less frequent, his sermons more subdued. He de-traded his toga for a more respectable waistcoat and had started attending actual church services. Though rumor has it, he still occasionally muttered fake Latin under his breath. The members, too, were shifting. Some had moved on to politics, others to poetry, and a few to quieter scandals involving cheese smuggling and questionable gardening clubs. The caves, once echoing with laughter and goat bleats, grew silent. One final gathering was held, a farewell feast in the inner temple. The candles were lit, the goblets raised, and Dashwood delivered a speech so full of satire it made a bishop faint, allegedly. The goat, now elderly and slightly deaf, was given a ceremonial sash and declared Archbishop of Absurdity. Then, with one last toast to nonsense, the club disbanded. The caves remained, of course, silent, mysterious, and occasionally visited by curious historians and confused hikers. The legends lingered. Tales of mock masses, missing trousers, and powdered rebellion echoed through the chalky tunnels, and Dashwood. He retired to his estate, built a church with suspiciously cave-like architecture, and spent his final years writing poetry about wine and wigs. A fitting end for a man who turned satire into sanctuary. But the spirit of the Hellfire Club never truly died. It lives on in every whispered joke, every candlelit gathering, every moment when someone dares to laugh at power and toast to nonsense. The caves are quiet now. No more toasts, no more mock masses, no more goats chewing on ceremonial sashes. Just silence, and the faint scent of wax and wine lingering in the chalky air. But if you listen closely, you might still hear it. A distant laugh, a clink of goblets, a whisper of fake Latin drifting through the tunnels. Because the Hellfire Club, for all its absurdity, left behind something more than scandal. It left behind a story, one too strange to be entirely forgotten. Historians debate the facts. Did Benjamin Franklin really lose his trousers? Did Dashwood actually crown a goat? Were the rituals satire, sacrilege, or just very elaborate sleepovers? The truth, like the tunnels, is winding, but the legend endures. Tourists still visit West Wickham, peering into the caves and wondering what secrets lie beneath. Some say the inner temple is haunted, not by ghosts, but by laughter. Others claim the goats were reincarnated as local politicians. That part is unconfirmed. And in a way, the Hellfire Club lives on in every candlelit gathering where people dare to be silly, in every whispered joke that pokes fun at power, in every moment when history is retold, not with solemnity, but with sparkle. The powdered wigs have been boxed away. The goblets polished and shelved. The goats retired to a quiet pasture, where they now nibble grass and occasionally dream of velvet cushions and honorary titles. But the Hellfire Club was never just about caves and candles. It was about something deeper, something delightfully unserious. It was about rebellion through laughter, about turning power into parody, about gathering in secret, not to plot, but to play. And in that spirit, we invite you, yes, you, to join a new kind of club, a club of sleepy sinners, of dreamers, gigglers, and history lovers, who prefer their facts with a side of cheese and their bedtime stories with a dash of scandal. There are no robes required, no Latin chants, no goats unless you insist. Just a cozy corner, a flicker of curiosity, and a willingness to let history be weird, wonderful, and wildly comforting. Because the past isn't just dusty dates and solemn speeches. It's powdered rebellion. It's candlelit nonsense. It's the kind of story that helps you drift off with a smile. So, fluff your pillow, raise your imaginary goblet, and toast to the sacred order of nonsense, where every night is a feast, and every dream is a chapter waiting to be written. The candles have long since burned down, the velvet robes folded away. The laughter, once echoing through chalky tunnels, now floats gently through time like powdered dust on a moonbeam. The caves of West Wickham are quiet now. No more mock masses. No more goat processions. No more goblets raised in honor of Saint Bacchus of the bottomless cup. Just silence and the faint scent of wax, wine, and whispered rebellion. But if you listen closely, you might still hear it. A distant chuckle, the clink of a ceremonial goblet. A goat bleating in Latin, or something close to it. Because the Hellfire Club, for all its absurdity, left behind more than scandal. It left behind a feeling that history doesn't have to be heavy, that rebellion can be soft, that satire, when whispered in candlelight, becomes something strangely soothing. And maybe that's why we tell these stories. Not just to remember the powdered wigs and velvet cushions, the fake Latin and flaming toasts, but to remind ourselves that even the most powerful people once danced in caves, toasted to nonsense, and forgot their trousers. It's comforting, isn't it? To know that beneath the pomp and powdered posturing, they were just human, silly, sleepy, and searching for something that felt real, even if it came wrapped in velvet and goat bleats. So tonight, as you settle into your own inner temple, perhaps a blanket fort, perhaps a pillow throne, know that you're part of the tradition, a tradition of cozy rebellion, of sacred silliness, of bedtime stories that dare to be both ridiculous and real. You, dear listener, are now an honorary member of the Society of Sleepy Sinners. Your goblet may be imaginary. Your robe may be a bath towel, but your spirit. And if you ever find yourself wandering through West Wickham, look for the caves. Step softly, listen closely, and if you hear a faint bleat or a distant toast, don't be alarmed. It's just history whispering, reminding you that nonsense is sacred, and that laughter, when lit by candlelight, never truly fades. If you were handed a velvet robe, a goblet of wine, and a candle, and told to sin like a gentleman, what would you do? If you were a member of the Hellfire Club, the answer was simple. You'd laugh loudly, preferably in Latin, and ideally while wearing a wig so large it had its own gravitational field, because beneath the goat bleats and mock masses, the Hellfire Club wasn't just about indulgence, it was about satire. It was a candlelit comedy show disguised as a secret society, a rebellion against the stiff collars and solemn sermons of 18th century England. The members weren't trying to summon demons. They were trying to summon giggles. They mocked everything sacred: religion, politics, fashion, even themselves. They rewrote biblical verses to include punchlines about wine and trousers. They held fake rituals where the only holy relic was a cheese wheel. They toasted to imaginary saints like Saint Bacchus of the bottomless cup and Saint Jeremy the goat. And they did it all with flair. Sir Francis Dashwood, the club's founder and chief mischief maker, once delivered a sermon entirely in Pig Latin while wearing a bishop's hat made of pastry. Lord Sandwich, yes, the sandwich guy, gave a speech about moral decay while dressed as a Roman centurion and eating grapes off a silver sword. One member brought a trained parrot that could recite the club's motto, "Do what thou wilt." The parrot was later promoted. It was a form of protest, a candlelit rebellion against hypocrisy, pretension, and the idea that power must always be serious. The Hellfire Club believed that laughter was sacred, that nonsense was noble, that powdered wigs were best worn while dancing, and in a world obsessed with appearances, they chose absurdity. If you imagine the Hellfire Club as a boys-only candlelit frat party with powdered wigs and goat jokes, you're not entirely wrong, but you're also missing the most intriguing part of the story: the women. They weren't listed in the official rosters. They didn't wear powdered wigs unless it was for fun. And they certainly didn't deliver pig-la-tone sermons. But they were there, in the shadows, in the stories, and sometimes in the satin sheets. Some were actresses, some were courtesans, some were aristocrats with a taste for rebellion and a closet full of disguises. They were known by nicknames like Lady Betty the Bold, Madame X, and the Duchess of Daring. They arrived in masks, stayed for the wine, and left before dawn with secrets tucked into their corsets. One tale tells of a woman who attended, dressed as a pagan goddess, complete with golden sandals and a pet owl. Another supposedly performed a mock trial where she sentenced a powdered wig to exile for crimes against fashion. They weren't just decoration, they were participants. They laughed, they drank, they toasted to St. Bacchus, and they occasionally rewrote the club's motto to include the phrase, "and Don T, forget the lipstick." But society didn't know what to do with them. Women weren't supposed to be witty or wild, or wearing velvet robes in candlelit caves. So, history blurred them, erased their names, turned them into rumors. But the Hellfire Club remembered. They toasted to the ladies of liberty. They carved initials into the cave walls. They wrote poems about the goddess who danced with wine. If you ever find yourself wandering the chalky hills of West Wickham, England, and stumble upon a cave entrance shaped suspiciously like a keyhole, congratulations. You've found the gateway to one of history's most deliciously absurd conspiracies. The Hellfire Caves, built by Sir Francis Dashwood himself. The caves were supposedly a philanthropic project, a way to provide jobs during a local economic slump. But let's be honest, nobody carves a mile-long tunnel system with a banquet hall, a mock temple, and a goat-shaped alcove just to be generous. This was a playground, a powdered wig Disneyland, a place where satire echoed off stone walls and goblets clinked in candlelight. But then came the rumors, whispers of secret rituals, of masked figures chanting in Latin, of a goat, yes, a literal goat, being crowned king of revels and given a throne made of wine barrels. Some claimed the goblets held blood. Others said they held truth. One particularly imaginative rumor insisted they held a potion that made you speak only in Shakespeare quotes. And then there was the Great Cave Conspiracy. According to legend, the club hid documents in the caves, scandalous letters, forbidden poems, and one very incriminating sketch of a bishop dancing in his underpants. Some say Dashwood buried a treasure. Others say he buried a joke so powerful it could topple Parliament. In reality, probably just wine stains and wig powder. But the mystery remains. Tourists still visit the caves. They walk the winding tunnels. They peer into the goat alcove, and they wonder, was this all just satire? Or was it something more? A secret society of sin? A rebellion in robes? Or simply a group of gentlemen who believed that laughter was sacred, goats were regal, and goblets should always be full? All good things must end, even velvet-robed rebellions. By the late 1760s, the Hellfire Club was beginning to unravel, not with a bang, but with a polite cough and a slightly overcooked roast. Sir Francis Dashwood, the club's founder and chief mischief maker, had grown older. His powdered wig was now more powder than wig. His goblet clinked less often, and his sermons in pig Latin had lost a bit of their sparkle. The members, once wild and witty, were now respectable gentlemen with titles, estates, and gout. Lord Sandwich had sandwiches to invent. Others had reputations to salvage, and the caves, once echoing with laughter, grew quiet. The club didn't collapse. It simply faded. No dramatic arrests, no scandalous expos, just a slow retreat into history's shadows. But the legend, oh, the legend grew. Whispers of secret rituals, of masked women and crowned goats, of goblets that held forbidden truths and tunnels that led to enlightenment, or at least to the wine cellar. Victorian writers romanticized it. Modern historians puzzled over it. Conspiracy theorists turned it into bedtime fuel, and tourists still visit the caves. They walk the winding paths. They peer into the mock temple. They imagine powdered men toasting to Saint Nonsense, because the Hellfire Club wasn't just a society, it was a statement, a reminder that laughter, even in Latin, is sacred. The candles have burned low. The goblets are empty. The powdered wigs have been hung up, slightly askew, like forgotten trophies of a very peculiar war. And the Hellfire Club, it's no longer a place, it's a whisper. A giggle in the archives, a smirk in the footnotes, a powdered echo in the caves of West Wickham. They were never truly evil. They were never truly holy. They were something far more dangerous. Funny, they dared to laugh at power, to toast to nonsense, to wear velvet robes and goat masks and say, what if rebellion looked like a costume party? And in doing so, they left behind something rare, a legacy of irreverence, not the kind that shouts, the kind that chuckles, that raises an eyebrow, that writes history in invisible ink and signs it yours in satire. So, tonight, as you drift off, remember, the Hellfire Club wasn't just a secret society. It was a bedtime story for grown-ups. A reminder that even in the stiffest of centuries, someone was always laughing. And maybe, just maybe, that someone wore a powdered wig and toasted to Saint Bacchus with a goat by their side. They say if you wander the Hellfire Caves late at night, long after the tourists have gone and the gift shop has closed, you might hear it. Not a scream, not a chant, but a sneeze. A very dignified, powdered sneeze. And if you follow it, past the mock temple, past the goat alcove, past the place where Lord Sandwich once dropped his grapes, you might find him. The ghost in the wig powder. He's not terrifying. He's mildly annoyed. He's been haunting the caves since 1774, ever since someone spilt wine on his velvet robe and forgot to apologize. He floats. He sulks. He occasionally recites Latin poetry about cheese. Some say he's Sir Francis Dashwood himself. Others say he's just a very committed actor who got lost during a historical reenactment. But one thing's certain, he's still laughing. He giggles when tourists mispronounce Latin. He chuckles when someone asks if the caves were used for actual satanic rituals. And he cackles when someone tries to take a selfie with the goat statue. Because even in the afterlife, satire lives on. The ghost in the wig powder doesn't haunt with chains. He haunts with punchlines. He whispers jokes into the chalky walls. He rearranges brochures to spell saint nonsense. And once a year, on the anniversary of the club's founding, he hosts a ghostly toast, goblet raised, powdered wig floating, goat plushie in hand. Centuries have passed. The goblets are antiques. The powdered wigs are museum pieces. The goat, probably retired. But the spirit of the Hellfire Club, it's alive. Not in caves, not in conspiracies, but in stories, in every whispered bedtime tale that dares to be a little silly, a little irreverent, a little powdered, because rebellion doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it wears satin. Sometimes it giggles. Sometimes it shows up at midnight with a candle and a punchline. And you, dear listener, dear dreamer, you've become part of it. You've wandered the caves. You've toasted to saint nonsense. You've met the ghost with a powdered sneeze. You've laughed in Latin, or at least pretended to. You've joined the Velvet Rebellion. So tonight, as you drift off, know this. The Hellfire Club was never just a place. It was a mood, a wink, a powdered philosophy. And now, it's yours. Raise your imaginary goblet. Wrap yourself in your metaphorical velvet robe, and toast to the sacred art of not taking anything too seriously. Because in a world of stiff collars and serious faces, you chose satire. You chose softness. You chose powdered dreams. Imagine this, a Tuesday morning, a Starbucks. A man in a velvet robe and powdered wig ordering a pumpkin spice latte. No one bats an eye. Because in the modern world, absurdity is everywhere. And the Hellfire Club, they'd fit right in. They'd host secret meetings in co-working spaces. They'd toast with oat milk lattes. They'd rewrite TikTok trends in Latin. They'd wear goat masks to brunch and call it performance satire. Sir Francis Dashwood would have a podcast. Lord Sandwich would be a food influencer. The ghost in the wig powder would haunt comment sections with snarky emojis. And you'd be the storyteller. The keeper of powdered rebellion. The one who reminds the world that history is in tea, just dates and battles. It esque wigs, wine, and whispered nonsense. Because the Hellfire Club wasn't about the past. It was about the mood, the mischief, the sacred silliness, and that mood. It's timeless. Long after the last goblet was drained, long after the powdered wigs were boxed up and the goat masks retired to dusty attics, something strange began to happen. The Hellfire Club, once dismissed as a footnote in England's eccentric history, began to whisper again. Not in caves, not in conspiracies, but in libraries, in the quiet corners of dusty archives, where candlelight once flickered and parchment curled with age. Their stories lingered, not as scandal, but as satire, not as shame, but as shamer. It started with a poem, a cheeky little verse tucked into the margins of a sermon book. Saint Bacchus, bless this wine-soaked page and spare us from the bishop's rage. Then came the letters, dozens of them, written in flowery script, sealed with wax, and signed with names like Lady Velvet and the Earl of Excess. They weren't political, they weren't romantic, they were ridiculous. One letter described a mock duel fought with baguettes. Another detailed a ritual involving synchronized sneezing and a choir of trained pigeons. A third was simply a recipe for sin cake, which included wine, sarcasm, and a dash of powdered rebellion. Historians didn't know what to do with them. They labeled them eccentric ephemera. They filed them under miscellaneous nonsense. But the stories kept surfacing in diaries, in footnotes, in bedtime tales whispered by candlelight. And slowly, the Hellfire Club transformed. No longer a scandal, no longer a secret, but a symbol of satire, of softness, of the sacred art of not taking anything too seriously. The library of velvet echoes, as some romantics now call it. Ice and tea, a real place. It's a mood, a memory, a collection of stories that live in the minds of those who dare to laugh at history. Every society has its rules. Some are carved in stone, some are whispered in shadows, and some, like those of the Hellfire Club, are scribbled on wine-stained parchment and sealed with a goat hoof print. Welcome to the Velvet Rebellion's secret code. It wasn't published. It wasn't official. It wasn't even entirely coherent. But it was sacred, a candlelit constitution for powdered pranksters, a manifesto of mischief, a bedtime blueprint for those who believed that satire was a form of salvation. Let's begin. Article 1. Thou shalt toast to nonsense. Every gathering must begin with a toast. To liberty, to laughter, to Saint Bacchus, patron of wine and questionable decisions. Goblets must be raised. Wit must be sharp. And the wine, ideally older than the youngest member present. Article 2. Robes are mandatory. Dignity, optional velvet robes, are the official uniform. Colors may vary. Accessories encouraged. One member once wore a robe embroidered with Latin insults. Another wore a cape made entirely of cheese wrappers. Both were promoted. Article 3. Latin is to be used incorrectly. All rituals must include Latin, preferably fake Latin. Examples include Domino's Pizza, Sanctum est in vino giggles, et2. Goat, correct Latin, is grounds for mild punishment, such as being forced to recite poetry to a goat. Article 4. Goats are honored guests. Goats are not props. They are participants. They may interrupt rituals. They may wear ceremonial sashes. They may, on occasion, be elected to office. One goat once served as treasurer. He embezzled nothing but hay. Article 5. Satire is sacred mockery, must be clever, never cruel. The goal is not destruction, but delight. Members may parody sermons, speeches, and fashion trends. One ritual involved reenacting a royal coronation using vegetables. The cucumber was crowned, the carrot wept. Article Vi. Sleep is a sacred rite after every gathering. Members must retire to their chambers, preferably with a warm goblet, a soft robe, and a scandalous bedtime story. Snoring is permitted. There was one ritual so absurd, so elaborate, so gloriously nonsensical, that it was whispered about, but never officially recorded. Known only as the Velvet Eclipse, it was said to occur once every 7 years, or whenever someone spilled wine on the sacred wig. The ceremony began at midnight, when members gathered in the deepest chamber of the Hellfire caves, each wearing robes stitched with stars and moons, and one member dressed entirely as a comet, complete with a tail made of silver ribbons. A goblet was placed on a pedestal and filled with a mysterious liquid, rumored to be wine, honey, and a dash of powdered sarcasm. The goat, naturally, played a central role. Draped in velvet and wearing a monocle, it was led in by candlelight and given the honorary title of Celestial Overseer. The members then performed a slow, spiraling dance around the goblet, chanting phrases like "In vino lunars" and "Blessed be the cheese wheel." At the climax of the ritual, someone would dramatically declare, "Let the eclipse commence," at which point all candles were extinguished, and everyone sat in silence, listening to the goats chew thoughtfully. No one knows exactly what the ritual meant. Some say it was a parody of celestial ceremonies. Others believe it was just an excuse to nap in robes. But one thing is certain. It was the club's most beloved nonsense. A moment where satire, sleep, and starlight met in perfect powdered harmony. And so, dear listener, as the final candle flickers and the goat settles into its velvet cushion, we close the book on the Hellfire Club, a society of sin, yes, but also of softness, silliness, and sacred satire. You've wandered the caves. You've toasted to Saint Nonsense. You've met powdered ghosts and crowned cucumbers. And now you've witnessed the velvet eclipse. Sleep well, gentle rebel. Dream deep beneath velvet skies. And may your night be filled with goblets, goat wisdom, and powdered peace. Good night.